I think you have to work hard at whatever you're doing. If you're looking for the shortcut, the trick, the easy way, you can get by perhaps for a while, but you won't be strengthening the talents that lie within you. People remember the championships, 10 of them at UCLA. They remember the banners, the winning streaks, the great players, and all those nights when it seemed like we had figured out something nobody else could quite solve. From the outside, I suppose it looked like basketball gave me almost everything a coach could ask for. But those aren't the moments that stayed with me the longest. So after all those victories, what were the moments basketball never completely allowed me to leave behind? Some of them happened long before UCLA became UCLA. One came when I was still a boy and learned how 1 point could stay with you for a lifetime. Another came when my own words hurt a young man I was supposed to be helping. There was a game I kept coaching in my mind years after the Final Horn, and there were questions around our program that forced me to think about responsibility in ways winning never could. Then there was Nell. Basketball taught me how to prepare, how to compete, how to accept what I couldn't change. But life eventually gave me losses no scoreboard could explain. Those are the moments I understand differently now. Not the banners, the things I carried after everybody went home. Long before anybody called me Coach Wooden, I learned something about losing that never really left me. I was 17 years old, playing for Martinsville High School in Indiana. We had won the state championship in 1927, and a year later we were back in the final, this time against Muncie Central. When you're that young, you don't think much about perspective. You think about winning the game in front of you. We had been champions. We wanted to be champions again. It became the kind of game where every possession mattered. Neither team could get away from the other. Late in the game, we were hanging on to the smallest possible advantage. Then everything turned. Muncie Central's Charlie Sechrist put up the shot that decided it. When it was over, the scoreboard read 13-12, 1 point. I've lived long enough to understand how small 1 point looks on a piece of paper. But when you're 17 years old and standing there after losing a state championship, it doesn't feel small at all. Years later, when I wrote about that game, I said it was still painful to recall. That was true. Time can change the way you understand a loss without removing the memory of it. What helped me was something I had already seen at home. My father had lost our farm years earlier. He didn't spend his life complaining about what had happened. He accepted what he couldn't change and went forward. That example stayed with me when basketball gave me my own disappointment. I began to understand that the final score couldn't be the only measure of whether you had succeeded. That idea became important to me as a coach. I eventually told my players that success was the peace of mind that came from knowing you had made the effort to become the best you were capable of becoming. That didn't mean I enjoyed losing. I hated losing as much as anybody. But if winning alone determined your worth, then one bounce, one shot, or 1 point could decide too much about who you believed you were. That game in 1928 taught me how painful losing could be. Years later, basketball would teach me something harder. Sometimes the thing you carried wasn't what somebody did to you. It was what you had done to somebody else. There are losses you regret because of what happened on the scoreboard. Then there are people you regret hurting. Edgar Lacy was different. In January of 1968, we went into the Astrodome to play Houston in what people later called the game of the century. We had won 47 straight games. Lou Alcindor was dealing with the effects of an eye injury. Houston had Elvin Hayes. More than 52,000 people were in that building. And the pressure around that game was unlike anything college basketball had seen before. Edgar started for us, but he struggled. I took him out after about 13 minutes. Houston beat us 71-69, and afterward I was frustrated. I made a comment to the press about Edgar that I came to regret. I said, in effect, that the way he had played gave me the impression he didn't want to go back into the game. At the time, I was thinking like a coach who had just lost a major game. I wasn't thinking enough about what those words might do to a young man. 2 days later, Edgar left the team. That was the turning point for me. A substitution is basketball. A bad game is basketball. Even a loss like Houston was basketball. But once Edgar walked away, it wasn't only basketball anymore. We continued playing. The season moved forward. We eventually saw Houston again in the Final Four and beat them decisively. From the outside, people could look at that and say UCLA had corrected the loss. But there was nothing to correct with Edgar. Years later, I spoke about that episode and admitted that what I had said publicly was something I regretted. I had embarrassed him. I had handled the situation poorly. Whether I intended to hurt him didn't change the fact that I had. That's a difficult lesson for a coach. You spend years telling young men that words matter, that character matters, that self-control matters. Then one moment of frustration reminds you that the coach has to live by those standards too. I don't believe coaching is about never making mistakes. I made plenty of them. What matters is whether you're willing to recognize them. With Edgar, I learned that authority gives your words more weight than you sometimes realize. A coach can forget a sentence almost as soon as he says it. A player may carry it for years. Houston ended our winning streak. That wasn't what stayed with me. What stayed with me was the knowledge that in one disappointed moment, I had failed to treat one of my players with the care I expected from myself. And a few years later, I would learn another kind of regret. This time, it wouldn't be about something I said. It would be about something I didn't do. There are games you lose and eventually learn to leave where they ended. That one in 1974 never worked that way for me. We were in Greensboro for the national semifinal against NC State. We had won 7 national championships in a row. Bill Walton was leading our team. David Thompson was leading theirs. Everybody understood what was at stake, and by then every team that played us carried the added motivation of being the one that finally stopped UCLA. The game went into overtime, then it went into another one, and in that second overtime we had the kind of lead a team like ours usually knew how to protect. We were up by 7. That is the part that stayed with me. Because when a coach looks back on a game like that, he doesn't only see what the players did. He sees the choices he made, the choices he delayed, and the moments when he should have acted differently. NC State kept coming. David Thompson kept creating problems. The game began slipping away from us possession by possession. Years later, I still thought about the timeout I didn't call. I thought about whether David Myers should have been defending Thompson. Those weren't things somebody else put on me. Those were questions I put on myself. When the game ended, NC State had beaten us 80-77. Our run of 7 straight national championships was over. So was our long NCAA tournament winning streak. The season was finished, and there was no chance to fix it the next night. That's one of the cruel things about coaching. Sometimes you can make an adjustment tomorrow. Sometimes you can watch the film, correct the mistake, and get another opportunity. Sometimes the final horn comes first. I had already won more championships than I ever imagined I would. Later we would win another one. But winning before that game didn't erase it. Winning after it didn't erase it either. As I got older, I understood that responsibility is one of the prices of coaching. When things go well, people praise the players and the system and the program. When things go badly, a coach has to be willing to ask what he could have done differently. I asked myself that about NC State for years. Not because I thought one decision guaranteed victory. Basketball is never that simple. But because I knew there were moments when I could have responded differently, and I had to live with that. That loss taught me something Edgar Lacy had already begun teaching me. A coach can regret what he says. He can also regret the moment he stayed silent. And eventually, I would face a different kind of question altogether. Not about one game. About what I had allowed myself to see around the program I had built. Winning has a way of making everything around a program look cleaner than it really is. For years, people saw UCLA through the championships, the discipline, the players, and the standards I tried to teach. That was the public picture. But there were also things happening around the edges of the program that became harder to ignore with time. Sam Gilbert was part of that story. He was a Los Angeles businessman who became close to a number of our players. He was around the program, around the families, around the social side of their lives. Over the years, questions grew about the kind of help some players received through him. That put me in a difficult position because I had spent my entire career talking about character, responsibility, and doing things the right way. And yet Sam Gilbert became part of the UCLA story, whether I liked it or not. I never believed that I was running a dishonest program. I never believed that I had knowingly built our success on violations. But as the years passed, I had to consider something more uncomfortable. Maybe I had trusted too much. Maybe I had been too focused on coaching, on teaching, on practice, on the next game. At one point I used the words tunnel vision. That was probably as close as I ever came to describing the problem. A leader can be responsible for the things he does, but sometimes he also has to think about the things he failed to notice. That is a harder question. You can look at a game film and see exactly where you made a mistake. You can see the possession, the substitution, the timeout you should have called. There is no film for this. There is only the question of how much you knew, how much you should have known, and whether success made it easier not to look too closely. Years after I retired, the relationship between Sam Gilbert and UCLA continued to be discussed. The NCAA eventually sanctioned the program after my coaching career was over, although those later violations were not simply a judgment on what I had done as coach. Still, the questions remained attached to the dynasty. I had to live with that. I could say my conscience was clear, and I did. But saying that did not make the questions disappear. Maybe that was the lesson. Integrity is not only about knowing what you did. Sometimes it is also about asking whether you were willing to see everything happening around you. For most of my life, basketball gave me problems I could work on. This was different. There was no practice plan for it. And then in 1985, life gave me something even basketball could not help me understand. I had learned how to lose basketball games. I had never learned how to lose Nell. She had been there before anybody knew my name, before UCLA, before the championships, before people started talking about records and dynasties and the pyramid of success. We were married in 1932, and for more than 50 years, she was the person who knew me without all of that attached. Basketball took us through different towns, different jobs, different pressures. It gave us seasons that seemed endless, and years when the attention around UCLA became almost overwhelming. But Nell was always separate from that. She wasn't impressed by the things other people were impressed by. She knew the person underneath the coach. When she became ill with cancer, there was nothing in my experience that prepared me for it. A coach spends his life believing in preparation. You study, you adjust, you teach. You try to put people in the best position possible. There are some things you cannot prepare your way out of. On the 21st of March, 1985, Nell died. We had been married for 53 years. After that, the house was different. My life was different. And every month, on the 21st, I wrote her a letter. I would write about what had happened, what I was thinking, things I still wanted to tell her. Then I would place the letter with the others. Month after month, year after year, people sometimes thought that was unusual. To me, it wasn't. When you have spent more than half a century speaking to someone, you don't suddenly stop having things to say just because they are gone. I had always tried to teach my players not to worry about things beyond their control. Do your preparation. Give your best effort. Accept the result. That philosophy helped me through basketball. Losing Nell was different. There was no lesson that made the loss smaller. There was only time, memory, and the hope that somewhere beyond this life I might see her again. After Nell died, I said more than once that I wasn't afraid of death the way I might have been before. I knew what I was waiting for. That realization changed the way everything else looked. The championships still mattered, the players mattered, the years at UCLA mattered, but basketball had never been the whole of my life. And when the person who had shared almost all of it was gone, no trophy on a shelf could fill that space. For most of my career, I had tried to teach young men what success meant. Losing Nell taught me something basketball never could. Some things aren't measured by what you achieve. They're measured by how deeply you feel their absence. For most of my life, people measured what I did by championships. I understood that. Basketball keeps score. Somebody wins, somebody loses, and the banners usually belong to the people who finished on top. But age changes the way you measure a life. The games become smaller in your memory. The people become larger. You think about the words you wish you had chosen more carefully, the decision you might have made differently, the things happening around you that perhaps you should have seen more clearly. And eventually you understand that even the greatest victories cannot protect you from losing the people you love. I spent my career telling young men that success was not the same thing as winning. I believed it then. I understand it better now. Winning can give you trophies, records, and moments people remember long after you're gone, but it cannot give you a life without regret. It cannot prevent loss, and it cannot tell you whether you became the person you were capable of becoming. The banners told people what we won. The things I carried afterward told me who I had become.